A dramatic shift in America's trade policy landscape unfolded this week as a U.S. federal appeals court delivered a sweeping ruling against former President Donald Trump's signature tariffs. The decision not only casts doubt on the legality of Trump's economic strategy, but also raises fresh questions about the balance of power between the White House and Congress. At the heart of the ruling lies a fundamental constitutional principle: who truly has the power to levy tariffs in the United States. The court's judgment, handed down on August 29, 2025, declared that Trump's sweeping tariffs on nearly all global imports were unlawful, effectively striking down the cornerstone of his trade policy. In its decision, the appeals court emphasized the constitutional and statutory limits of presidential authority. One section of the ruling reads, "The government appeals a decision of the Court of International Trade, setting aside 5 executive orders that imposed tariffs of unlimited duration on nearly all goods from nearly every country in the world, holding that the tariffs were not authorized by the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, EA 50, U.S.C., Section 171, ECQ, because we agree that IEPA's grant of presidential authority to regulate imports does not authorize the tariffs imposed by the executive orders. We affirm." The judges were clear. The authority Trump cited, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, i.e. EPA, was not designed to give presidents an open-ended right to impose sweeping tariffs. Instead, they stressed Congress alone possesses that power. The Constitution grants Congress the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts and excises, and to regulate commerce with foreign nations. U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1(3), tariffs are a tax. This language leaves little ambiguity. For decades, presidents have tested the limits of their authority on trade, but the court's opinion reasserts that tariffs, as a form of taxation, fall squarely within Congress's jurisdiction. The ruling immediately drew a sharp and defiant response from Donald Trump. On his platform of choice, Truth Social, the former president lashed out at the decision. He insisted that the judges had gotten it wrong and promised to keep fighting. Trump called the ruling incorrect on Truth Social. Despite the setback, Trump's tariffs will technically remain in place until October 14th, pending further legal maneuvering. That timeline gives his team a narrow window to prepare an appeal to the Supreme Court, a move they are almost certain to pursue. For Trump, the issue is not just about economics, it's about political identity. His trade policy, centered on the aggressive use of tariffs, has long been a pillar of his America First agenda. To have that foundation dismantled in court strikes at the very core of his claim to have reshaped America's global economic posture. The implications of the ruling are far-reaching. Trump's tariffs, often criticized as blunt instruments, affected nearly every country in the world and disrupted decades of trade norms. From China to the European Union to allies in Latin America, Trump's use of tariffs was both a bargaining chip and a weapon. By declaring these measures unconstitutional, the appeals court may force a wholesale recalibration of U.S. trade relations. Global markets, already jittery from uncertainty surrounding energy prices and supply chains, could face new turbulence if the tariffs are suddenly lifted. Economists warn that without the tariffs, U.S. leverage in negotiations could weaken. On the other hand, industries that suffered under higher import costs, from American farmers to manufacturers reliant on foreign parts, might breathe a sigh of relief. Still, for now, the business community is in limbo. Companies remain uncertain about whether the tariffs will vanish after October 14th or continue under an emergency stay if the Supreme Court takes up the case. What makes this case especially consequential is the broader constitutional question it poses. While presidents have long asserted broad powers under statutes like IEPA, this ruling draws a sharp line. The court essentially said emergency powers are not blank checks. This is not the first time courts have wrestled with the scope of presidential trade authority, but rarely has a decision gone so far as to knock down tariffs already in place and affecting nearly all imports. Legal scholars note that the ruling could have a ripple effect on future presidents, limiting their ability to use economic tools unilaterally in times of crisis. If upheld by the Supreme Court, the decision could mark a turning point in restoring congressional primacy in trade policy. As of this weekend, both the Treasury Department and the Commerce Department have declined to comment. Their silence speaks volumes. Both agencies were central in implementing Trump's trade agenda, and both now face uncertainty over how to respond if the tariffs are lifted. Inside Washington, reactions are mixed. Some lawmakers in Congress, particularly Democrats and a handful of free trade Republicans, welcomed the ruling as a reassertion of constitutional order. Others warned that undermining the president's ability to act decisively on trade could weaken America's global standing. For Trump, the political stakes are high. With the 2026 midterm elections approaching, his allies will likely frame the ruling as judicial overreach, part of a broader narrative that portrays Trump as a victim of an establishment determined to thwart him. Critics, however, argue the ruling is a long overdue correction to a reckless trade policy that alienated allies and drove up costs for American consumers. They point to studies showing that Trump's tariffs cost American households an average of $1,200 annually in higher prices for goods ranging from appliances to clothing. Trump's vow to fight back ensures the issue will remain front and center in the political debate. His base, largely supportive of his protectionist agenda, is unlikely to waver. But the broader electorate, facing inflationary pressures, may see things differently. What happens next will depend heavily on the Supreme Court. If the justices agree to hear the case, it could set the stage for a landmark ruling that defines the outer limits of presidential power on trade. Legal experts say the court could issue an emergency stay, allowing the tariffs to remain in effect while the case proceeds. That would prevent immediate disruption in global markets, but prolong the uncertainty. Meanwhile, America's trading partners are watching closely. European officials, already engaged in tense negotiations with Washington over agricultural subsidies and digital taxes, see the ruling as an opportunity to push for a reset. In Beijing, analysts speculate that China could gain an edge if US tariffs collapse without a clear replacement strategy. For now, the ruling stands as a stinging defeat for Donald Trump. It is more than just a legal reversal. It is a blow to the very essence of his economic doctrine. As the judges made clear, tariffs are not tools presidents can wield at will. They are, at their core, taxes, and taxes are Congress's business. Tariffs are a tax, the court wrote in plain language, reaffirming the Constitution's assignment of trade powers to the legislative branch. Whether Trump can salvage his trade legacy now depends on whether the Supreme Court sees things his way. Until then, the world waits.